Greenhouse gas emissions from transportation account for 27% of the United States' total greenhouse gas emissions in 2020. And that is the largest sector of emissions in the United States. And it's the sector that has seen the biggest amount of growth in the past 30 years. Most of those emissions from transportation are from the transportation of private individuals. People just trying to go about their day, getting from point A to point B, going back and forth to work, to school, to run errands, going to see friends, and taking those vacations. Almost all, 95% of the world's transportation energy comes from petroleum-based fuels, mainly gasoline and diesel. In modern society, it's kind of hard to travel a considerable distance without burning fossil fuels. Hard, but not impossible. In 2019, climate activist Greta Thunberg crossed the Atlantic Ocean on a sailboat to arrive at the 2019 UN Climate Action Summit. Thunberg refuses to fly because of the carbon emissions of the airline industry, and the trip was announced to be carbon neutral. But we're not all Greta Thunberg, so for those of us who want or need to travel, what is the most sustainable way to do it? Well, here's a chart. This graphic shows the carbon footprint of travel measured in grams of carbon dioxide equivalents per passenger per kilometer traveled. This graph is based on data from the UK, so things might vary slightly depending on the country, but the relative equivalencies should be the same no matter where you live or travel to. Not surprisingly, trains are better than planes, small cars are better than large cars, and electric vehicles beat out gasoline-powered vehicles. And while not on the list, walking or biking is always going to be your best choice. But that chart doesn't tell you everything that you need to know. If you want to travel the most sustainable way, it's often not as easy as looking at a chart. It's a little bit more complicated, and there are several factors that come into play. One of the biggest ones being infrastructure. That chart showed CO2 emissions per kilometer. And if every place you were going, the various forms of transportation just went from point A to point B, it would be an excellent measure. But in the United States, at least, it's not that easy. Sometimes you just can't get to a place via a train or a bus, even though it's the most sustainable option. I'm currently traveling from Washington, D.C. to Louisville, Kentucky. And we don't own a car, but if we did or rented one, it would have taken 600 miles to get from DC to Louisville, Kentucky. If we had taken a bus, it would have been an additional 120 miles, 720 miles total, because we would have to first go to Cleveland and then down to Louisville. By train, it would be even longer, 862 miles, going first from DC to Chicago, and then Chicago down to Louisville. Oh, and it would also take 27 hours. By plane, it is 474 miles for a direct flight, the shortest distance of all the options. If we had to connect, well, it would have been longer. If you have to fly and can choose a direct flight, you'll reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, because jets burn the most fuel at takeoff. And because of the energy cost of getting a plane off the ground, shorter flights release more CO2 per distance traveled than longer flights. But just because flying was the shortest doesn't mean it was the greenest choice. But it wasn't the worst. The best option, that 27-hour train ride. Or maybe an electric car. But you'd need to consider the source of electricity, because 60% of the electricity in the US comes from burning fossil fuels. Okay, I'm back in Washington, D.C., had a very successful trip to Louisville, but the trip wasn't, the most sustainable, given that we flew there for a few days and flew back. There were better options, but not ones that really worked for us. But if you want to travel and try to be as sustainable as possible, I've got a few tips for you. The first one would be to walk or bike whenever possible, because let's be honest, any form of transportation that involves fossil fuels is not sustainable at all. The other one would be that trains are almost always the best option over, moderate to long distances. If traveling internationally, the greenest option is pulling a Greta and taking a boat. But that will, take some time, but it could be a lot of fun. Oh my gosh, the clouds are not cooperating with me. If it's a choice between driving or flying long distances, flying economy class is often the greener option, which is a little bit counterintuitive. I definitely thought it would be driving. And then when driving, an electric vehicle is almost always going to be better than a gas or diesel, especially if you're in a place that, powers the grid via renewable energy. Longer term, we got to change a whole lot of things. Honestly, we probably shouldn't be traveling as much as we are, jet setting, international vacations, and also just moving stuff all over the globe. Economies and communities should be far more localized, and when we do travel, it should be, via electrified transportation. It's pulling power from a grid that is producing electricity from renewable sources. I hope you enjoyed this video. I make videos about living a happier, healthier, more sustainable life, really just looking at my life and seeing, what am I doing? How can I do it better? So if that interests you, be sure to subscribe. If you found value, give it a thumbs up, and I wish you the very best. All right, talk to you later. Bye.